everybody, we're going to start today with our I can statement. Today's I can is I can multiply complex numbers. And this will be notes number 4 for you. So this is a little bit of a combination of all of the things that we have learned with adding and subtracting, and we're just going to have that extra step of distribution and multiplying. And we're going to throw back to what you are familiar with before we get to the complex numbers part. So if I had x plus 2 times, let's say, x minus 4, we are going to distribute and multiply across. So this x is going to get multiplied to this x and to the negative 4. So I'm going to take x times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. And then, so I've used up the x. Now I'm going to take the 2 and multiply it to these pieces as well. 2 times x and 2 times negative 4. So I get plus 2x. And then 2 times negative 4 would be negative 8. So in your next step, you're combining any like terms that you have. Usually they're just right here in the middle. So I can combine negative 4x plus 2x. So my final answer is x squared minus 2x minus 8. All right, so you should be a little bit familiar with sort of distribution and multiplying to, we would say, two binomials together. So what we're going to do, instead of using the letter x, we're going to use the letter I to represent our imaginary term, and that's what makes this a complex number instead of just the variables like you've seen. So a big idea for us today remember, you have a complex number. There is a real plus or minus and imaginary. That's what makes a complex number. We have I. And today, we are going to see I squared, which we are going to turn to a negative 1. So I kind of want to talk about that for just a minute and like where that comes from. So what we just saw, x times x is x squared. We just saw that. That should kind of like be like, oh yeah. What's happening is you have the same variable, so you're like kind of adding the exponents on top. So it makes sense that if I have I times I, well, that would be I squared, right? And so here are sort of the mechanics to why I squared equals a negative 1. So what we learned in notes number 3 is that I is the square root of negative 1. Well, they're saying I have 2 square roots of -1. So really, I have -1 and -1 inside of the square root. And what happens when we have a pair of numbers inside of the square root? Well, one of them comes out. So that's why the square I squared is -1. They mean the same thing. So we're going to use that idea today that I squared is -1, and it's going to be part of our answer there at the end. So let's look at that. So I have, let's say, 2 plus I times 5 plus 3I. So I'm distributing. I'm going to take this 2 and I'm going to multiply it to the 5 and the 3I. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 3I is 6I. Then I'm going to take, so I've used up the 2, I'm going to take this I, I'm going to multiply it across. I times 5 is 5I. And now here is the important part. So I've got I times 3I is going to be 3I squared. And I'm going to put a star on that because you'll never have an I squared in your answer. Never leave I squared in your answer. What happens is, sort of off to the side, what we have is 3 times I squared. Well, we learned that I squared is -1. So I'm going to replace I squared with a -1. So really I have 3 times -1. You might want to put that in parentheses so you don't think that you're subtracting there. It's 3 times a -1. So this right here becomes -3 or -3. And what will happen in our final answer is we have 10 plus 6I plus 5I minus 3. I can combine the real parts, so I can combine 10 minus 3 is 7. And I can combine 6I plus 5I is 11I. So besides combining like terms, the new idea for when you're multiplying is that you're going to have I squared in your answer that you have to change. So what happens to this +3 is it just becomes a -3. There's no more I there. We replaced the I squared with a -1 and we multiplied those things together. So we'll do this a couple more times and then I'll let you try some. Example 2. All right, I'm going to distribute, so 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 2i is 16i. Negative 4, so make sure you're bringing the negative with the 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4i. And negative 4i times 2i. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. But we have I times I is I squared. And I'm going to put a star on that because we're going to have to fix this. Right here, we got to fix it. So what I mean by fix it is that I have a negative 8. And I have this I squared that's being multiplied to it. Well, I squared is negative 1. They mean the same thing, and this is our big idea for today. So I'm going to replace I squared with negative 1. And I'm multiplying these numbers together. So negative 8 times negative 1 becomes a positive 8. So no longer do I have negative 8i squared. I have a positive 8 there instead. So you can get to the point where you're not having to work all of this out. I'm just kind of showing you what's going on in the math background. But really, it's literally going to just change its sign, and I squared is going to disappear. So I'm going to write down the other items that we had. We had an 8 plus 16i minus 4i. And now I'm going to combine like terms. So I can add 8 plus 8 is 16. And then in the middle here, I can combine 16 minus 4i is going to give me 12i. I'm going to do another example for you. So I'm going to distribute 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times negative 2i is negative 10i. Negative 3i times 2 is negative 6i. And negative 3i times negative 2i makes that a positive 6. I times I is I squared star. So before I move on, I've got to fix the I squared. So I have a positive 6 times I squared. I squared is negative 1. And this is being multiplied together. So I have 6 times a negative 1. So positive 6 times negative 1 is going to give us a negative 6 instead of that 6i squared. It's 6 because of the I squared. It changes to a negative 6, no more I. So I'm bringing down 10 minus 10i minus 6i. And I'm going to combine like terms. So 10 take away 6 is 4. And 10i minus 6i will be negative 16i. Always make sure that you have your real number first and your imaginary number second. Because that's standard form for a complex number, and we'll be looking for you to be doing that. All right, I'm going to show you one more example. And it's going to be formatted just a little bit differently. And then I'm going to have you try a couple. Okay. So this is 5 plus 2i quantity squared. So a little bit different formatting, but we're still on the same concept. What this exponent here tells you is to write it twice. So I'm going to take 5 plus 2i and I'm going to write it down 2 times. And now it looks like the problems we were just working on, so I'm going to distribute. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2i is 10i. 2i times 5 is 10i. And here I'm going to get a positive 4. I times I is I squared, and I'm going to put a star on it. I'm going to fix this. So without doing all that extra stuff and showing you the mechanics, this is a positive 4. I squared is a negative 1. So what happens is this just becomes negative 4. Because positive 4 times negative 1 becomes negative 4. So what happens is the sign changes and I goes away, disappears. Kind of the 4 absorbs it. I'm going to bring down my other like terms. So I can combine 25 take away 4 is 21. 10 plus 10 is 20i. All right, so I'm going to have you try a couple, and then we'll do a little bit of practice in Delta Math. So try these. Okay, so please pause the video, work these out, see if your answers match mine at the end. If they don't, let's try to find where in the work, do a little error analysis to see where we disagree. I could have possibly made a mistake, so help me out if I did. Hopefully I didn't though, and we can find, usually because now you're adding and subtracting at the same time, you start kind of switching around the rules. Like sometimes people say, oh, 3 times 1 is 4. So just be careful. We're multiplying here. 3 times 1 should be 3. So be careful about just little things like that that sneak in. All right, try these. All right, so take a look at number 1. See if we agree on the answer. You should have gotten 23 minus 11i. All right, so the answer for number 2, I got negative 32 plus 24i. So hopefully that lesson is going okay. I'm going to make a few questions for you to practice in Delta Math, and I hope things are going well.